everyone. We are momentarily going to be speaking with Sarah Woodyard of Sewn Company about hand sewing tools and the last week of the hand sewing help desk for the beginner's guide to the 18th century. It worked!
Hello, it
Yay!
worked.
Hi!
Hooray. Oh, I am like really cut off. Hold on. Move that back.
It seems like let's see, Instagram's done like a whole new this is the first time that I think I've actually gone live and it looks like this. This is very unique and interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting.
Yeah, it is. Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing? Thanks for sitting down to chat about hand sewing tools and
Yay.
yeah.
Let's see. So I want to make sure that I have the there we go, comment pinned so people can go to, all right, the link that we'll talk about. Man, this is a whole new getting used to how this works. It looks really really different.
I don't know about your end, but on my end, it's great because the questions and the comments aren't going over my face.
Yeah, it is. No,
So
it's
that's
really
really
cool. I like
nice.
it.
Yeah.
It is. It's brand new. Hello from Oklahoma. Hi. Okay, so you actually have a lot of things going on right now. You have a lot of offerings.
I
Like
do have a lot of offerings.
a
Yeah.
lot, which is exciting. We'll talk about those for a moment before we get into the hand sewing tools that we we were going to be talking about. So it is the last week of the Beginner's Guide to the 18th Century membership site's hand sewing help desk. That was a mouthful. It's always, anytime I tack something onto Beginner's Guide to the 18th Century, it's a really long sentence. So yeah, so it's the last week. And the link that I pinned into the live is actually the link that people can go to get those questions in. And it's Sewn Company, SEWN Company, if you can't see that, .com/help desk. Super, super easy, super simple. And you can get your questions in. And then, so if you're watching this later after the live, we're recording it on January 25th. And then this Friday is going to be the last video that you'll put inside of the Beginner's Guide to the 18th Century membership. And even if you're not a member, you can go ahead and go to that link. You can find out some more information about membership, and you can also go ahead and ask Sarah any questions that you have. So you don't have to just be a member, but the videos will be put into the membership. So I think that's like everything on the Beginner's Guide things. And then you've got a hand sewing retreat going on. Just tell us about all the things that you have going on.
Yeah, great. Yeah, right now I'm hosting a hand sewing retreat. It is a 2-week kind of intensive of hand sewing skill, and it builds on itself every day. It is absolutely free, and I'm hosting it on my YouTube. I'm also putting it on my website too. So it depends on kind of how you like to follow along. You can either add an RSS feed on that, or you can go to YouTube and subscribe and click the bell. So today is all about running stitches. Tomorrow is going to be hemming. And anyway, so we're just building on those skills. So if you're interested to really get a deep dive / just refresh, like, please follow along. Something else that I'm doing tomorrow is I'm actually giving a lecture about my background. I served a 7-year apprenticeship in 18th century dressmaking and accessory making at the Margaret Hunter shop in Colonial Williamsburg. While I no longer work there, I'm no longer affiliated with them. I thought it was would be a nice thing to go down, memory lane and really talk about where my skill set comes from. Because of course, like, we learn from so many people, and we just kind of, it's really a collective of kind of skill. So I wanted to talk about my apprenticeship because I think that skill building and understanding where it comes from is really key. So tomorrow, either at 11 a.m. Eastern or 7 p.m. Eastern, I'm going to be doing a lecture that will also be question and answer, conversational, so we can kind of talk about that. And I'm also just launched a pre-recorded mending workshop on my site. And so if you're interested to learn how to mend in a historically appropriate way, specifically an 18th century, early 19th century way, it's called invisible mending, because historically people didn't put a contrasting patch on the front of their apron and call it good. They tried to make it as invisible and seamless as possible. So if you want to practice those skills, that's something else that I'm currently offering.
I just had like a flashback to being like 8 and my mom putting like patches on my clothes. So that's, thank you for that. So we have a couple of questions in the chat. So one was, what is your YouTube channel? And then somebody else was asking where the lecture will be.
Yeah, absolutely. My YouTube channel is Sewn Company, SEWN, and then Company. So just go to YouTube, you can circle that, you can search for that, or you can go to my Instagram, Sewn Stories, and there's a link in the bio to it. The lecture is going to be hosted on Zoom, and you can sign up for that going to my website, sewncompany.com/lectures.
Perfect. Easy. All right. So let's hop into what we're here to talk about today, hand sewing tools. I know that we've talked a bit about what would people who are really starting out, who are really beginning their hand sewing venture, what do they really want to understand about? And I know that's some of the questions that we've had in the membership site as well. It's really like, what are those primary things that you need? And then, you know, always getting into figuring out thread, because that's crazy confusing for people who are just getting started. So take it away.
Absolutely. All right. Well, then let's start with that then. We'll start with the more complicated, hard question, because I understand, like when I was first hand sewing, and still sometimes I'm like, okay, what does this mean? What is it? What kind of thread do we need? So just kind of as a basis, when it comes to 18th century, early 19th century sewing, tried and true fibers are going to be silk and linen. Silk, super strong, stronger than steel. And so that's why they're using it historically, not because it's fancy. I know today it seems like fancy and a little bit more expensive, but the strength is absolutely worth it. So first, look for those fibers. Secondly, don't put them through a machine. Like, don't put your linen thread through a sewing machine. Obviously, we're here to talk about hand sewing, but I just wanted to kind of put that caveat.
That's really good to know. I have never heard, I haven't done that, but that is, thank you for saying that. We'll put that right here. Check that off.
Because I mean, obviously a lot of folks, you know, if they're coming to hand sewing, they likely have a good root in machine sewing. And that might be kind of your, where you go back to. So you do need to just use some of the hand sewing thread specifically for hand sewing work. So that being said, with linen, you want to match the weight of linen that you're using with the weight of your fabric. And something that can be extremely confusing is how the heck do you even know what's lightweight, what's medium weight, what's heavyweight? There's two brands that you're going to see sold on the kind of historical market as it relates to reproduction items. You're going to see this type of linen, which is that white spool. There's a variety of people who do sell this, and it's being sold at different weights. You'll notice when you look at a website, it might say like 80/2, 60/2. It might even say 30/2. The first number is the weight of the thread. The lower the number, the heavier the thread. So 30/2 is going to be something you might use for like a heavier weight woolen, for example. Or if you're making like a market wallet out of like a super heavyweight linen, then you might use something chunky like that, but that's going to be a very chunky choice. What's going to be good for kind of your mid-grade, mid-weight fabrics, things like 60/2. And the 2 that's in that number indicates the ply, meaning that just like yarn, you might notice there's like a twist in it. There's actually 2 strands of yarn that's been twisted together, so it makes it a 2-ply. So that's something that's where that number comes from. 80/2, 90/2, 100/2, those are going to be in your fine textile range. So if you're doing like really nice, I don't know, say if you're doing like cap sewing, or if you're making a lightweight apron, or if you're making a lightweight neck handkerchief, I would go towards like that 90/2 realm. So that's going to be a nice fine thing. 80/2, 60/2, I would say medium weight fabrics for that. And you can use linen to sew on wool, linens, cotton. Wouldn't use it on silk, but you can use it on a variety of fibers. But again, the weight is going to match with that. Another type of linen that is on the marketplace is this type, which is Londonderry. The difference between this one and this type is the ply. So with this one, you're going to see it listed as, for example, this one is a 50/3. That means it's kind of like medium weight, kind of a little bit more on the heavier weight side, and 3 means that it has 3 plies. So if this is next to a 50/2, it's going to be slightly heavier just because it has more strands wrapped around itself. So those are the 2 that are on the marketplace. Silk wise, it's interesting. With silk thread, you might think, okay, I need to match the weight of the silk with the weight of my fabric. That is actually not the case in the 18th century. When I have studied extant historical, like 18th century gowns, for example, made out of silk, and admittedly, those gowns are made out of like silk brocade and damasks and textiles that not so many people sew with. That being said, the seams, the underarms, the top stitching is all done with a heavier weight silk. So I'm talking like almost as heavyweight as like a buttonhole twist. So you have to kind of reframe kind of the way you think about weight of thread as it relates to sewing on silk. So even if you're sewing on silk taffeta, don't use a super fine, lightweight silk thread. Use a slightly heavier weight silk thread. And silk threads also are going to be sold in the same weight as you see with the same like theory of weight as you see with linen thread. So for example, like a number 100 silk thread, super fine, very, very fine. Whereas say like a number 50, number 30, that's going to be a heavier, chunkier thread. So you want to look for the lower numbers as it relates to most of the 18th century sewing. Now the caveat I will make on that is, and this is, I will say, a modern adaptation that I have done, is that when I've sewn on extremely fine cotton, like muslin, for example, like sheer lightweight cotton for caps and aprons and ruffles, I really like to use a super fine silk. I like to use like a number like 100, or I like to use Gutermann silk that you can actually buy at Joann's. This is a relatively lightweight silk, and it doesn't have the luster as some silks do, so it almost looks like I'm sewing with cotton. Cotton today is so weak that that's one of the reasons why, well, non-mercerized cotton that doesn't have coating on it is going to be kind of weaker. And so you can use it on fine sewing, but when it comes to doing gathering and whip gathers, that requires somewhat some strength. And so the silk I find is like a really kind of good middle ground for that. So that's nice about the silk is you can get it at your local store.
Okay, so you brought up a good point that I want to ask about, because you said about the silk that you can get at like say Joann. And I was going to ask you, because for most of us, there's not a place that we could just go get like a linen thread, right? Because I've looked at all those kinds of craft stores and I haven't seen anything, and I didn't even realize that, like, you could get silk thread there. So so for the linen thread, maybe like how you, when I mean, I know that most people who are in the community know that there's some different places where you can purchase that linen thread online. How do you know like how much to get for a project? Because it's not like you can just run to Joann or run to Michael's or I don't know, Walmart, like wherever the places are that you would go and like buy regular, cotton thread or polyester thread. How would you know how much to purchase? Because you're saying for that we could use the silk thread from Joann on certain projects that aren't silk.
Yes, you can.
Okay.
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's a fantastic question. So when you sew on a machine, you tend to use more thread, obviously, because you've got your top thread and your bottom thread, because you use your bobbin and so forth. Hand sewing, historically, you typically only see one strand being used. And so you actually don't use a lot of thread when it comes to making a garment. Even if you're sewing like a 3-piece man suit, or like, I mean, you're going to use a lot for buttonholes, like, but that's kind of its own special thing. You buy buttonhole twists specifically to do those buttons, and buttonholes. But if we're sewing like seams and top stitching and things like that, sometimes like a spool of like linen thread like this can get you through a project. I mean, this is a lot of thread. So, I mean, I will be honest, I don't know how many years I've had this, and there have been times when I haven't gone through it and it's actually gotten to the point where it's rotted because I've just had it so long. And so you will get your money's out of something like this. This is a ton of thread to use. And so that's a good point to bring up, because I know that some of these threads per spool are more expensive than, say, like buying this a polyester spool. But this is going to last you a long time. And so it'll definitely balance itself out. Something else I want to mention, just like before I forget, when it comes to linen, do not forget your beeswax. This is vital. because if you pull this thread through your fabric over and over again without the coating of the beeswax, it is going to shred. And you don't want your beautiful hand sewing to end up being shredded. So get your beeswax too.
Okay, that's good. So let me think. Okay, what about colors of thread? Because if we're talking about the linen thread and historically speaking, and so maybe it's not like going to Joann and you've got like the, endless
Yeah.
colors supplied.
Yeah.
So how do you choose thread that maybe the thread isn't going to perfectly match whatever you're making, and it's going to show somewhat?
Yeah. So silk wise, there are a variety of colors on the marketplace. Since we are kind of, I mean, we're adapting, right? We're still buying silk threads that have been dyed with like alkaline dyes. Like we're working with modern dyes. And so you can find a huge variety of colors to match your projects as it relates to your silk threads. When it comes to linen, you can also find a huge selection of colors, specifically in the Londonderry brand. Though
Okay.
this design right here, I think it only comes in white and natural that I've seen on the marketplace. But the Londonderry does come in colors. That said, if you're sewing on, like, say you're making like a brown linen petticoat, good utilitarian petticoat to like do some work in, you can sew that with white linen thread. That's fine. Like it's not historically inaccurate to do white on like a colored linen. So that's
Okay.
another thing to kind of reframe kind of your ideas on, is that sometimes it doesn't have to match.
Okay. All right. Next tool.
Next tool. Okay. So we talked about thread. So let's talk about needles next, because those are kind of best friends. So of course, the weight of your thread is going to dictate the type of needle that you choose. There's two things that you need to think about as it relates to needles: the length of the needle and then the weight of the needle. And that will match, of course, the type of textile that you're sewing on. As it relates to kind of a good kind of medium weight fabric, middle of the run, I really like size 9s, somewhere between a 7, 8, or a 9. That's going to be like a medium weight needle that's strong enough, it's sturdy enough to go through that weight of the fabric. I personally like to use a type of needle called a sharp, which tends to be on the longer end. And I'm talking about longer end when it comes to hand sewing needles. I'm not talking longer end when it comes to the whole breadth of needles, because you might have a tin at home that has like your grandmother's sewing with tools. That's a great place to start when it comes to needles. You're probably going to find some gems in there. I have a huge stash of the antique needles. I love them. You might come across needles that are like darners or beading needles and hear me say, oh, it's a long needle, that's great. Those are going to be too long. Don't use a super long needle. Pick a needle that's, about this is about 2 inches, 2 1/4 inches wide long. I need to measure it, but this is what I'm kind of referring to right here. This is a sharp. This is from Bowen. I love Bowen needles. They're super high quality. It is tempting to buy a assortment pack. I would caution you against that, especially if you're starting out, because you really want to know what tool you're working with. Because when you're starting out, you can't look at that assortment pack and say, oh yeah, that's a size 9. Oh yeah, that's a size 5. Oh yeah, this is this. Just get the pack. You'll probably go through these because sometimes our needles like to disappear in the work and they kind of run away. So I would recommend getting a pack of sharps size 9 Bowens. This is a good workhorse, but good start. If you're going to be working on something that is heavier weight, go down a number. So the number will decrease as it gets bigger. Same thing with thread, right? The lower the number, the chunkier the thread, the chunkier the needle. If you're looking for a finer thread, or excuse me, you're working with finer thread, you're working with finer fabric, go for a size like 11 or even a size 12 with these. So again, sharp is kind of a good, just like standard. Something that's very equivalent to that is also an embroidery needle. So you might also have embroidery needles. They tend to have longer, bigger eyes, and that makes it easier to actually thread chunkier silk thread through. So some people are frustrated with sewing with that chunkier silk when they're working on a project. Find a needle with a bigger eye, like an embroidery needle.
So are the sharps, are those available in a local capacity, or are those also, you need to order those online?
I would strongly suggest that you order these online unless you are lucky enough to have a quilt shop in your town or close by, or a specialty sewing store nearby. I would strongly dissuade you from going to a big box sewing store and trying to find needles.
Okay.
It will work in a pinch, but if you're really trying to start at a good foundation, like I would suggest buying these online or at a specialty
Because that
store.
brand is not going to be available in the box.
I have never seen this in a box
Okay.
store.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Needles, thread and needles.
Thread and needles. What's next? Scissors. Let's go with scissors. So as you're hand sewing, you're going to, of course, be like working in the minutia, right? Like you're going to be looking at this thread, you're going to be like paying attention to it, and you're going to be having to snip it when it's done, so there's not like a massive tail. I would highly encourage you to invest in a pair of embroidery scissors. Super sharp, small, lightweight embroidery scissors are seen in historical images all over the place as just little scissors that people are using. Tailors, milliners, mantua makers, seamstresses, tiny scissors to snip the thread. Also, when you're actually threading that needle, snipping the end of the thread and then kind of wetting it with your hand, this is going to make sure if these are sharp, it's a nice clean cut. I'm sure some of you have been frustrated before where you like cut the thread and it's like there's one strand that's kind of frayed and you're just like can't get it into the needle. A good, clean, sharp pair of scissors, that's going to eliminate some of that problem. So I'd highly recommend something like this. These you can buy at a big box sewing store. They're going to run you about $20 to $40. It depends on how much you want to spend. They are more expensive than other tools, but save up. They're absolutely worth it. You also can get specialty ones too. The ones that I'm holding, this is not a commercial, I just love this brand, is from William Whitley and Sons. They're a Sheffield maker over in England that's continuing the scissor trade. So I'm always about preserving those skills. Medium-sized scissors like these are a more historically accurate shape. I purchased these at Colonial Williamsburg. These are great for mantua making, so cutting to the body, cutting out your fabric. If you're, say, like at an event and you want to cut out some yardage, this is a style that I would recommend. Can't get these at a big box store, but I think that Burnley and Trowbridge may still sell some medium-sized scissors that are kind of more appropriate for that kind of work. And then, of course, like bigger scissors for just cutting out yardage, Ginger shear, like dressmaking or shears, aren't appropriate for historical reenactment, but are fine, if they're not in front of the public. Let's see here, what else? So we've got kind of our basics.
What about, you go ahead. I wonder if we're going to say the same thing.
Oh, I haven't talked about pins yet.
Okay, yeah, talk about
Let
pins.
me talk about pins really.
I was going to say the thimble.
Yeah, that's where I was headed. I was like, it's my favorite, and it's also like a hard thing for people to get used to. So, but before I move on, let me just quickly talk about pins. Pins also need to be essentially around the weight of the fabric you're working with. That being said, my favorite pins to work with are pins that are fine dressmakers pins that are 1 1/4 length. They're on the longer side because that will allow you to move them well and pin efficiently. They also look more like a historical pin. Not perfect. They have I don't know if you can see it. They have like the flat head on them. Occasionally you'll find people in the historical community who are making reproduction pins that have the really cool like round head on them. That's really the ideal. That's what you want. So if you ever see those, like snatch those up. But these are great for sewing. Again, also like if you're at an event, these are not going to be kind of offensive. My personal favorite brand right now is this brand, Iris brand. They're out of Germany. They come 500 in a tin, and the tin's just like super cute. So, and it's also very handy, but don't take the tin to an event, obviously. But I like the longer pins. When you look at pins, you're going to see there's a number like 1, and you'll be like, what does that 1 mean? Or it might say 1 1/4. That's the length of the pin. Again,
what's the best way, speaking of going to events, like what is the best way, historically speaking, to sort of where to put all of these supplies and what's a great way to house them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a couple of things you can do. If you are like, I would get some sort of either basket or some sort of like paste paper covered box, like some sort of innocuous box. Like IKEA for the longest time was selling those like brown paper boxes that were just paper on the outside, and I don't know what they look like on the inside. You might be able to like recover the inside with like marbled paper or something. But anyway, some innocuous box is a good place to keep things. And then also, again, like some sort of a basket. You see a lot of images of people using small baskets for keeping their stuff in. Then kind of within that, or like a market wallet. I mean, you can keep your stuff in a market wallet.
I guess you would just have to like I mean, I guess a market wallet and pockets. We won't even go down that rabbit hole. That's a crazy rabbit hole to go down that
That's
we
true.
don't have time for.
So
but
yeah, if you're sitting,
obviously a market wallet is super appropriate and a pocket's super appropriate. But like I was thinking of like all the ways you can get poked. How careful you want to be with like your even your tiny embroidery scissors and your pens. So I guess you could just wrap them in something to safely.
So like I said, like having like that basket or a box is like a good big, like kind of a macro way of storing things. Kind of on the micro level, kind of if you need to have them at that moment on your person. I really like wearing my scissors and I used to really like wearing my scissors and my pincushion on my waist.
Yeah.
So I would take like,
that's true. Yeah.
So like a pincushion, right? It could be a heart-shaped pincushion. It could be like a little, like a, just a rectangular pincushion, adding a piece of woven linen tape to that, and then just wrapping it on your waistband, and then doing the same thing with your scissors, so that then you have your scissors there, you have your pins and needles there, and when it comes to thread, you could easily, and wax, you could put that in your pocket and that won't poke you.
That's perfect.
Just don't sit on this.
I have like I think I have three pin cushions that I put, and that I've become addicted to collecting them, and so I have them, but they're all like the kind that are safe. You're not going to sit on them. So and that's the part about the scissors too. So that's all, and you could technically keep it. And then they're all are great ideas for people who want to be doing stuff.
And sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. One thing I wanted to say before we move on is, of course, like the housewife, the sewing roll is also a good, just kind of one size, one place to put those tools. Small scissors can also fit into this as well.
And your beeswax can go in there as well, right? I don't have one, but I think there's room for all of that. So that's a lot of great ideas for people who are maybe going to be newly going to events and wondering, because I think those are equally kind of tools anyway, especially like the housewife and cushions and those things. So okay, so we've talked about and people are joining, kind of coming in a bit late into this. This is, if you're watching it live right now and you're popping on, this is actually going to be in my feed. And what I'm also going to do is all the things that we talk about, I'm going to add this inside the membership too. For those of you who are not members of the Beginner's Guide to the 18th Century, I do have resources all within that, and I'm going to take all these things that Sarah's talking about and make a special resource category, because this has been Hand Sewing Month, January, inside the membership. Again, for those of you who are just joining, Sarah has been answering your hand sewing questions this month. So there's already one video inside of the membership, and there's going to be the last video this Friday inside the membership of the different things that she has answered your questions. And of course, so I'll be putting this video in there as well for people inside the membership who may not actually be on Instagram and get to check this out. And I'll make sure that we have some written, detailed information about this. Somebody's asking, what type of events are you referring to? We're actually just talking about whether you're going to like a living history event, if you're going to a reenactment. So maybe you're a reenactor, you're a new reenactor, and you're wanting to be able to sew as part of your impression, or you work or volunteer with a living history museum. So those would be I think those are kind of the only two that I'm thinking of, but there may be more, Sarah, that I'm not thinking of, about events that people would go to where they would be displaying these things in 18th century or 19th century clothing.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a good overall description of it. Yeah. any place that you just want to appear historically appropriate for your environment, I think is just a good kind of basic for that. And actually, I know the person who asked the question. Hello. And so since we're talking about kind of 18th century, this is the 18th century Beginner's Guide to the 18th Century is the linen agency's focus, and where the hand sewing help desk is. A lot of what they're focusing on are people who are getting into 18th century reenacting, living history, and kind of wanting to gather the stuff that looks good for existing in the 18th and early 19th century.
Listen, at this point, if people are like desperate to just go and be in the clothes and do the 18th century things, you can just go sit on a bench outside of your local Target.
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay, if you just need, and especially want people to be like, what, this person is crazy, might give you a little excitement in your life.
Totally.
No, I haven't thought about that at all. No.
And the other thing too is, like, I'm just because we are focusing on kind of historic focus stuff, but of course everything I'm saying completely applies to any kind of modern hand sewing practice, and is the tools that I use today to make both historical and modern hand sewn clothes.
That's right. That's right. So did we cover everything except for the thimble? Was that the last one?
Mostly, yeah. So I've got a couple more things that are maybe like the sewing basket you may not think of as tools, but let me talk about the thimble first, and then we'll discuss those other things. So yeah, I love my thimble. Kendall knows how much I love my thimble. And the reason I love my thimble is because I was trained to hand sew with garment construction in mind. So that means sewing a lot every day. And so that means that I want to sew quickly and I want to sew efficiently. And I also want to sew in a manner that doesn't hurt my hands. And having a thimble on my dominant hand, my middle finger of my dominant hand, allows me to repetitively, for hours, hit that needle against my hand and not get hurt by it. And so that's one of the reasons I'm a huge proponent for the thimble, is it allows you to get into that rhythm. That being said, when you first start wearing a thimble, it feels bizarre because it's literally like, you know, 30 seconds of an inch or even like a 1/16 of an inch extra added to your hand. And so of course it feels clunky. Mm-hmm. So what I recommend is that if you find a thimble, when you find a thimble that fits, or you have your thimble and you're kind of like nervous about using it, is just wear it all day. Just wear it around the house. Wear it to a point where it starts to feel natural and normal. You know, I've gotten to a point where, just like, you know, if you wear a watch all day, you don't feel it. I really don't feel my thimble anymore. And so I know it's weird, it's so bizarre, but I would really encourage you just to wear it around all day. And when you are then learning how to sew with one, just expect that there is going to be a learning curve. You're going to have to get used to using it once again. But I don't want to say I'll promise you, because that's kind of potentially misleading, but I would really encourage you to do it, because I think that you will be happier in the end. When it comes to finding metal thimbles, again, that tin at your house may have a metal thimble lurking within it. It might be, you know, a family member's thimble that magically fits your finger. This one I got from Colonial Williamsburg as a gift after I left the shop. I have an antique silver thimble that I found at just like an antique dealer. You often will see like little baskets of sewing stuff. Like if you see antique needles, if you start to see scissors, like go for that stuff. If you see it in like a vendor, they may have like a bunch of thimbles. The way that they need to fit is they need to fit right kind of between your cuticle bed and the top knuckle there. When you put it on, you don't want to really feel a lot of compression. You don't want to feel a lot of tightness. You want it to be snug enough that it kind of is tacky and sticks to your finger. And you want it to be tight enough that you can shake your hand. It's not going to just go fly across the room. But you don't want it so tight that it's uncomfortable, or so loose that it does fly off, because it flies off as you're trying to sew. It's just going to be annoying. So you do have to get one that fits. So I do understand and recognize that it can be tricky to find one that fits. But once you get that, just go ahead and start that practice.
Okay.
How's your thimble practice going?
It's not going. It's not. I don't have, I have one, I think, but I have to go dig through and see again if there's some of those old things left over, especially passed on by my mom. But I need to go make sure I have one that fits.
Yeah, and you can get brass ones online. Brass thimbles are very historically appropriate. And so if you can find a brass thimble that fits you, that's great. I know that people are selling brass thimbles for, say, like Native American individuals use that on regalia. And so there are brass thimbles that are being produced for kind of other reasons. And also I believe that Burnley and Trowbridge sells one thimble. I think it might be kind of a one size thimble, but if it fits you, then like that's awesome. Look at Etsy, look at eBay, just start typing in like antique brass thimble, antique silver thimble, and see if you can find something that works for you. So the other tools that I wanted to kind of quickly mention that you may not be thinking about are your hands. These are really, really important tools to hand sew. Your eyes, the chair you're sitting in, and your light source. So the environment that you're working in and your body, those are crucial to actually being effective at hand stitching, because it's very important that as you're sewing that your body is supported. I know a lot of people like to hand sew in bed, or they curl up on the couch and they hand sew, and that can work for a very kind of short, temporary, brief amount of time. But if you really are like going to sit down and like make like a larger project and not working on it in shorter stints, I would recommend just like grab like a dining room chair, an office chair, something that's comfortable and supports you, and you sit up. If you have stays, put on your stays to hand sew and make sure your back's supported. You want to make sure that your work is at least your navel height, and you can do that by putting a pillow on your lap, putting some sort of stool underneath your feet to raise your lap up, crossing your legs, or you can sit at a table and work. Or you can sit on the floor and sit cross-legged like tailors did historically. Historically, there's a lot of body usage as it relates to sewing. So like you're using your lap often or using a pillow in order to support the work.
I'm glad that you brought that up. You know, we, again, if you're not part of the Beginner's Guide to the 18th Century membership site, some of the questions that Sarah asked or answered about the first set of questions about hand sewing questions that Sarah answered. One was about, you know, body posture. And I think that's like, I just assumed you just start sewing and you just do stuff. And like, personally, I suffer from tech neck because my body really hates the fact that I'm not living like a hunter gatherer and that I am at a computer all the time and not taking good care of my posture and muscles and support. Now, actually, I think I'm just going to start wearing my stays to do everything. It was that, or I was going to go get like the neck brace that you get when after you've been in a car accident, you know, something to like be upright. I'm like, maybe the stays makes more sense just in general. Like, but you know, I think those are things that you don't know. You just kind of get into this and you're like, I'm going to make, my first 18th century thing. And then before you know it, I mean, like for me, you know, my hands are all like messed up from like carpal tunnel, tendonitis, which is a reason why I don't knit very often anymore. I always wind up with some pretty wicked tendonitis, and then my neck. And so we don't live like people lived during a time where people were hand sewing sometimes every day or on a very regular basis. We live a very modern 21st century life where we're glued to devices all the time that really go very much against like our human, you know, physiology. Mm-hmm. So I think that I had no idea, and I just had countless, I wouldn't say injuries, but countless repetitive stress stuff, inflammation from not stopping to be like, maybe there's some, you know, not growing up sewing, being new to this. So I love that you're bringing this up and talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up playing tennis and softball, and I had a really bad sports injury because I played center field. I served anyway. So I got tendonitis in my shoulders and I got tendonitis in my scapula. And so I'm very aware of my body and its motion and what hurts it and what doesn't hurt it. And I understand like that's going to be different for different people. But I do think that, you know, our bodies are built to be a tool for us to use. And so therefore, I think we can use them efficiently and effectively as long as, again, the ergonomic is there. And I do recognize that people have injuries that need to either be worked around or just does prohibit them from hand sewing. That said, something else I would just encourage you is Actually, I did just make a video about this and put it up yesterday about ergonomics in
Yeah,
the
that's brilliant. Yeah.
in the uh, it's on in my 2 week kind of virtual hand sewing retreat. But a lot of people, when they first start hand sewing, I have noticed at least, is that they use their wrist. They think that they need to grip the needle really tight. And since they're working with a tiny thing and like a tiny stitch, sometimes it makes people do like this with their hands because you're thinking, oh, it's hand sewing. I'm only using my hand. You're actually not. You really are using your whole body. So make sure that when you grip your needles, you're gripping them lightly, you're holding the fabric lightly, and you're pushing the needle with your whole arm. So while yes, your fingertips might be positioning the needle where it needs to go, it actually ends up being a whole arm motion that gets it going in the right direction. So that's why sitting up straight, kind of relaxed, but still sitting up straight and using your whole arm almost like a pendulum, I guess, is going to then push it, and then it's your whole body versus just isolated here.
Yeah. Is it what would make your hands like cramp up? Is it that using just too tight, gripping too tight?
So a couple of things, yeah, is like when you're first starting something, of course it's stressful to learn, so you're like really focused, so it is easy to grip it too tightly. Another thing that sometimes causes that to happen are certain types of technique. So if you're doing like rolled hems, that inherently like causes you have to like use your hands really intensely to manipulate the fabric. But if you're doing like if you're doing like sewing, like some sort of hemming or back stitching or running stitches, you should be able to hold your hand relatively, light, and then the fabric relatively light. Unless the fabric is quite heavy, then you might need to take some like more breaks in between, or mix up the type of fabric you're working on if you can. Stretch your hands. Like I like to stretch my hands like this. I also like to, I will ice my arms and my wrists as well if I need to.
You mentioned light sources. What are your favorite, like what do you use? Do you
Yeah,
use daylight? Do you have some sources for nighttime that you use?
right. So definitely daylight is your best light source. One of the kind of odd questions I would get a lot when I was working at the millinery shop is that people would ask, "Oh my goodness, how did they sew all day without indoor lighting?" And it's, well, the sun. The sun is our light. Um,
The
so
window.
so I understand that a lot of people, obviously work throughout the day and their sewing is something they do at night. But if you do have time during the day, absolutely set up your chair next to the window and get that good light source, because that's going to be the best on your eyes, and it's going to be the best when it comes to the work that you're doing. When it comes to nighttime sewing, definitely get a lamp and sit right underneath it. And try for like not a warm colored light bulb, or if it's a warm colored light bulb, make sure it has like a higher like intensity to it. So you just want something that's bright. So it might be oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the name of it. What's that really bright white light?
Fluorescent?
Yeah, no, not fluor no, not
LED?
yeah,
Yeah, okay.
LED. Yeah. Fluorescent lights, at least for me, like really strain my eyes, and they just don't give a
Yeah, that's
clear,
kind of
good light
outdated
for me.
now. LED is like,
Thankfully,
that's like
yeah.
where it is, right? People
Yeah.
are using
Yeah.
LED. Yeah.
So LED is a very bright, white, clear light. So if you can get some sort of light that kind of comes right over your work, that's going to be really helpful for
Yeah.
you. So yeah, just make sure it's right on top of what you're
Yeah,
doing.
I like those. I always use the IKEA lamps that are like, it has like the big lamp, and then it's got the arm that you can kind of,
Yeah.
so I will put that like right next to me. So there's light going up, and then I just put the arm like right over me. And
Yeah.
those are all LED lights too. So
Yeah.
those are helpful. Okay. So we have talked about, let's see, thread, needles, scissors, pins, thimble, the parts of your body that are your tools, and of course the ways that you could uh, use the housewives, your pin cushion. You can use tape and attach your scissors to your apron somewhere in your historical clothes, baskets, market wallets, all the different ways that you can show off your tools and to be able to use your skills while you're at a historical event. Did we cover everything? Because it feels like we did.
I think so. I'm sure there's like, there's some little
It'll
tools
come
here
with
and
it.
there, but oh, actually, something that I didn't mention, which I think is worth commenting as to why I didn't mention it, is I did not talk about an iron.
Oh, yeah.
And for modern machine sewing, an iron is absolutely vital to doing your sewing. And when it comes to 18th century and 19th century, like women's accessories and women's clothing, the fabric tends not to be very heavy. And you don't need a lot of heat or any heat to actually press it the way it needs to be pressed. And so you don't really need an iron unless you are post production. So like you have your apron and it's been washed, that's the time to use the iron, is to make sure the fabric is like lovely and smooth and starched and pressed. But during the actual making of it, you might iron your fabric before you start sewing, but you don't need to iron as you go.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Because like
Yeah.
if you wash your linen and you dry it, it's gonna be pretty
Yeah.
wrinkly.
Yeah.
So you're like, go ahead and just that one time, but you don't need
Yeah.
a key
Unless you're
doing it.
doing
Yeah.
tailoring, of course. Then
Yeah.
tailors,
Right.
historically, that is integral to the process, and you do need to iron as you go.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, somebody asked like, what is this housewife that we're talking about? And our friend Zadie Grossman responded that it's a little rolled up kind of piece of cloth that maybe has some different sections. They're really cute, and a lot of people sell them as kits. So you could
Mm-hmm.
actually just buy all of the supplies, and then you could make them yourself. And they might have tape on the outside, and they just kind of roll up in a little bundle, and then that way you have a big part, a big like a place to put most of your sewing stuff, maybe all
Yeah.
of the things that you would need. Keeps it really neat. You could even, again, you could just put that in your pocket if you're doing historical costuming, and then you've got it right there when you go out to an event. And they're cute too, right? Even if you don't do costuming and you want to just have one of those for your stuff at home. Sarah, thank you so
Definitely.
much. Again, Sarah, right now, if you're watching this the week of January 25th, and I think you said next week as well, you've got this hand sewing retreat going on. So you're posting a video every day. And that's on your website, on YouTube. They can get to all of those places. Sewn Company, SEWN company.com is Sarah's website. Of course, that is in her bio in her Instagram. It's kind of all over here on the Linen Agency as well. And this is the last week to get your questions in for the hand sewing help desk that is inside of the Beginner's Guide to the 18th Century membership site. There will be a new video on Friday answering those questions. And if you want to know more about that, again, you can also go to Sarah's website. That's sewncompany.com/help desk. Thank you for coming and like sharing all of this good stuff. And I hope that everybody will go over and check out all the offerings that you have. You're always like, you always have a lot of really, really wonderful, fantastic free offerings. And also what people sometimes don't know is that you do hand sewing mentoring for a very, very fair price. And they really are getting someone who has just so many years of you. I mean, this is what you learned in school, and then you have all of these years of becoming a journeywoman with Colonial Williamsburg. Oh, and you're going to be talking about that Tuesday nights.
Yeah.
So much. I know. See? So you could like literally, people could go and I think basically just get like a full blown education and a know-how about hand sewing from you. You have so many great offerings. So thank you for bringing that to us and to all of us in the community.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm thrilled to be sharing it. I think it's really important that, of course, we remember what our hands can do.
Yes,
So thanks,
yes.
Kendall.
Thank you. Okay, everybody, have a great day. Bye, Sarah.
Bye.